In the years after the Second World War, London limped forward, bruised, smoke-stained, full of gaps where houses used to stand. Notting Hill was no postcard. The air still carried the sour tang of coal smoke, mingled with the smell of rubble, refuse, and sometimes worse. Buildings leaned into each other like old men in the wind. Many were derelict, their walls gashed by shrapnel, roofs patched with whatever timber could be found. 10 Rillington Place was one of them, a 3-storied terrace jutting from a street that the war had chewed and spat out. Inside, the floors were cut into cramped flats. No bathroom, no running hot water, just a shared outhouse at the end of the garden, its doors swollen from years of damp. Tenants without kitchens made do with camp stoves on tables. Those on the top floor carried buckets down the narrow stairs for washing. Desperate home for desperate people.
It would be the stage for one of Britain's most disturbing killers. His name was John Reginald Christie, born in Halifax, April 8, 1899, 6th of 7 children. His father, Ernest, was a strict disciplinarian, withholding warmth from wife and children alike. But his mother and sisters adored him, perhaps too much, spoiling him as if to make up for the father's severity. The boy's world swung between punishment and affection, a confusing soil for any mind.
The moment Christie later pointed to as defining came when his maternal grandfather, David Halliday, died. David had been quicker to anger than Ernest. Christie had feared him all his life. Watching the old man weaken and finally die, Christie felt relief, even pleasure. It was his first taste of a private, forbidden power, the fearsome gone, and himself still young, healthy, untouched. He turned to schoolwork. Scholarships carried him to private classrooms, boarding school, the church choir, the Boy Scouts. Yet socially he remained on the fringe. Classmates called him odd, queer, kept to himself. Attempts at romance failed quickly. Rumours about his sexual inability earned him cruel nicknames. By the time the First World War reached him, Christie was already brittle inside. In 1918, mustard gas burned his lungs and throat. Later, he would claim it left him blind and mute for 3.5 years. Records suggest otherwise, that he returned to the front lines soon after. In 1919, back in Halifax, he met Ethel Simpson, an attractive shorthand typist described as refined, well-educated. They married in 1920. A miscarriage early in their marriage carved a quiet canyon between them. Christie returned to prostitutes. Theft followed. He was arrested for stealing, then again for fraud and threats of violence. Ethel stood by him at first, but when he was released and moved to London rather than home, she stayed in Halifax. For a decade they lived separate lives, she with her family, he drifting through petty crime, brief RAF service, and prison terms. Ethel's own chance at remarriage collapsed when she confessed to another suitor that Christie was still alive and that she could not have children. The man left her. Soon after, she learned Christie had been arrested again. She went to see him in prison. Between the bars, they made a truce. He promised to give up crime. She agreed to return to him. Ethel left the safety of her family home for London. They moved into the ground floor of 10 Rillington Place. The garden door was theirs. Ethel could take the train north to visit her family. Christie used her absences for other pursuits. He liked things in order, quiet, a match struck cleanly, a chair placed just so, and he liked to be useful.
Christie grew from shadow like someone you thought you'd always known, the neighbour with the cough, the careful stoop, the flat Yorkshire vowels. He spoke with precision, measuring each word as if it cost him. He told of his police service, his knowledge of medicinal gas, his care for the sick. He cultivated the image of a man who knew things, who could fix problems discreetly. In a city of shortages, help was a currency. Women came for small treatments, for comfort, for the kind of advice that had to be whispered. The flat smelled faintly of carbolic, perhaps to cover other odours. The furniture was sparse, positioned just so. A door could be closed quietly, then latched.
He was solicitous, almost paternal, until he wasn't. His voice could shift in a breath from soothing to abrupt. And he would say, "There's a simple remedy. Just breathe in, deep, and it will settle your nerves." Outside, carts rattled over cobbles. Neighbours' voices carried down the hall. Inside, ordinary sounds kept his work hidden. London's air in the 1940s and early 50s was a thick, choking soup of smog. Lamps turned to halos, chimneys huffing black breath. In that murk, people drifted into each other's lives out of coincidence and survival. In 1943, Christie met Ruth First, a 21-year-old Austrian refugee who worked in a factory and sometimes sold sex to make ends meet. They met in a bar. She agreed to come back to his flat. Behind the closed door, in the rhythm of passion, Christie tightened a rope around her neck. He kept tightening until her body went slack. He hid her under the kitchen floorboards for the night, then, under cover of darkness, buried her in the communal back garden.
A year later, it was Muriel Amelia Eady, 31, a colleague at his job. She had bronchitis. He offered a cure. Into a jar he put a pungent mix and told her to inhale through a tube. She didn't see the second tube, the one connected to the kitchen gas pipe. She slipped under. While she lay unconscious, he violated her, then strangled her and buried her next to Ruth. The killings left no ripple beyond the smell in the garden, which could be blamed on drains and damp. And life on Rillington Place moved on.
In the upstairs flat lived Beryl and Timothy Evans, young, poor, and already struggling with a baby in a cot. The walls were thin. Their rows and reconciliations echoed down the stairs. Timothy was insecure, prone to drink, to telling grand stories about himself. His IQ was about 70. Beryl struggled with money and numbers. Fights over bills sometimes turned violent. Christie often played peacemaker, stepping in with a calm voice and an air of authority. When the couple found they're expecting again, Beryl wanted an abortion. In Britain, it was illegal. Christie said he could do it quietly.
On a day when Ethel was away visiting family, Beryl came downstairs. She never came back up. Later, when Timothy knocked to check on her, Christie blocked the door. He told him Beryl was dead. He persuaded Timothy to leave town and, unthinkably, to leave the baby, Geraldine, behind. Timothy went to Wales, to his hometown of Merthyr Tydfil, and told police he'd accidentally killed Beryl while trying to abort the baby. Said he'd put her in a drain outside. Police searched 10 Rillington Place. They found Christie, but not Beryl, not Geraldine, not Muriel or Ruth.
They searched again on December 8, 1949. This time they found the bodies of Beryl, Geraldine and a 16-week-old fetus in the garden washhouse. Both mother and child had been strangled. When Timothy learned Geraldine was dead too, he simply said yes when asked if he was responsible.
In court,
The star witness against Timothy Evans was John Christie himself. The jury heard a tidy story, shaped from Timothy's tangled confessions and recantations. The state preferred a straight line to a crooked truth. Evans was convicted of murdering his wife and daughter. On January 31st, 1950, he was hanged at Pentonville Prison, on the same gallows, by the same executioner, who would later take Christie's own life. At 10 Rillington Place, the smell remained.
The Christies' new upstairs neighbours were a family from the West Indies. Both John and Ethel resented them. Christie later painted them as threatening, but this was another story told for effect. In December 1952, Ethel died in her bed. Christie would claim she'd been convulsing, choking, and that he ended her suffering with a stocking around her neck. What he actually did in that room is his alone to know. Her body lay in bed for days. Then he remembered loose floorboards in the front room. He dragged her there, wrapped in a blanket, and covered her with earth.
Weeks later, on January 19, 1953, he brought home Rita Nelson, 25, a pregnant prostitute from Belfast. He offered an abortion. She inhaled gas from a jar, while he quietly fed kitchen gas into it. She collapsed. He assaulted her, strangled her, wrapped her in a blanket, and hid her in a kitchen alcove, sealing it with wallpaper. In February came Kathleen Maloney, 26, also a prostitute. The same ritual: gas, assault, strangulation, alcove. In March, Hectorina McLennan, 26, a former lodger, crossed his path in the street. She agreed to visit. She, too, ended up behind the wallpaper. 4 bodies now inside the flat. More in the garden.
Christie sublet the flat, with the bodies still hidden, and left. The new tenant noticed the alcove, stripped the wallpaper, and found Rita, Kathleen, and Hectorina. Police searched further, finding Ethel under the floorboards, and the garden graves of Ruth, Muriel, Beryl, and Geraldine. Christie was found days later, unshaven, adrift in the city he had hunted in for a decade. He confessed to the women in the alcove and to Ethel. Then, when the garden skeletons were unearthed, to the rest, including Beryl Evans.
In court, he was tried for Ethel's murder alone. It was enough. On July 15, 1953, he walked the short steps to Pentonville's gallows. The same wood, the same rope, the same hangman who had taken Timothy Evans. 1 man guilty, 1 man innocent. Too late. When a city wants to forget, it tears things down. Rillington Place was renamed. Number 10 was demolished. The site folded into a bland stretch of new housing.
But stories resist demolition. They stay in the archive, in the pauses of people who remember, in the official pardon that finally cleared Timothy Evans' name. The lesson is older than the house. Evil can be polite, bureaucratic, ordinary. It can pour you tea. It can speak in a calm voice and promise help. A chipped door number is nothing until someone makes it a threshold. And sometimes a house learns to speak if anyone will listen to its smells, its silences, its small repeated oddnesses. 10 Rillington Place is gone. The ground looks healed. But stand there on a quiet day and listen. The traffic, the air moving, and you may hear what the city says to itself. We remember, and we will not forget how easily we forgot.